that we have our esteemed speakers, Mark Emmerson and Anna Sarchet, that they are going to be sharing their very interesting work about impending and implementing an SEND first approach in schools and across the trust. Let me start by just sharing some information about our esteemed speakers today. I would like to start with a few words about Mark Emmerson OBE, who is CEO of the City of London Academies Trust. He is a behavioral insights advisor to the Department of Education. He describes himself as a relentless pursuit of top-tier academic performance and an unwavering support for disadvantaged pupils. All our academies are rated good or better, with 60% holding outstanding status. Mark is the chair of the London Bridge the Gap, a multi-sector stakeholder campaign to bridge the hidden London social mobility gap. Just to point out here that only 17% of disadvantaged young people accessing professional careers compared to 30% nationally. Mark was also the chair of the London Trust Leaders Network, an education strategy director between 2015 and 2017. And let me tell you how delighted we are that Mark is an alumnus of the University of Warwick. He actually studied in our PG program here between 1983 and 84, and he was made officer of the British Empire for Services for Education in January 2025. I'm also delighted that we have with us today Anna Sarchet, who is a principal of the City Academy Hackney, which is part of the City of London Academies Trust. Anna is an education professional who has a wealth of education experience in teaching and leadership acquired in a range of educational settings. We are also delighted that Anna is also an alumnus of Warwick, and she has studied in our PGC program here between 1999 and 2000. And just here to point out that City Academy Hackney is a school that is dedicating to providing all the students with the best possible educational opportunities. They believe that excellence is achieved through three key components: clear structures, high expectations, and strong relationships. So we are delighted to have them with us today, and the floor is over to you, Mark and Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's a long time since I was at Warwick, a long time. But as I was saying to you earlier, my niece is there, and she's coming back in October in second year in education and psychology. So she might be in, when she's over 60, she might be doing one of these, probably as a hologram in those days. But anyway, so it is great to be able to have a discussion around this sort of area, and I would invite people to stop me and ask questions if they need to, or put questions in the chat, because we really want to promote what we're doing widely in terms of the direction of travel for SEND and the care and the expectation we need to provide for children with special needs. There is, and on the slide you can see, there are some key aspects of or some key critical questions which are being posed at the moment. There is currently an SEND review led by Tom Rees from the school sector, who's going to report back in the autumn. But that has come about because of a huge problem of increasing demand on resources to fund our SEND programs across the country. There is, many people believe, a culture of overdiagnosis. The children who would previously be considered just within what would be considered an appropriate range for a normal classroom are being diagnosed with different levels of need, different aspects of need, and that level of aspects of need is being given, or they're doing this in order to achieve or bring in resource and attach that resource to the child to support that child in their education. There is also potentially a huge amount of discussion over different labels that children have and whether they are actually real conditions or they're conditions which are potentially just within what would be considered a normal distribution curve. The major reason why the government is looking at this at the moment is because the current model is unsustainable. The government understand that if every child, and every child has different learning needs, we all know that. If you've got your own children, you will know this. But it is unsustainable for every child in the country, or the numbers of children in the country at the moment, to have a level of resource attached to them, which is now costing £10.7 billion a year. And given the current budget restrictions, the need for frontline services to be funded, providing this level of funding or find better ways to deliver special needs to reduce that level of resourcing is what we are all charged with doing in the sector. There's also some myth that personalisation of educational approaches is appropriate for every child. And I'll talk about this later on, but it is really pretty clear that actually the majority of children are within a pretty restricted range in terms of their academic abilities and cognitive abilities. And of course, there are children who require specialist provision, but those numbers are probably less than is currently considered. And it's also true that within a classroom, the mainstream classroom, we have to be working with what is possible. We have to be working with what can be delivered. And it is the art of the possible in classrooms. It cannot be that a teacher can go around 30 different children and provide them with different levels of work and individual attention all the time. That is not possible. So if we're going to educate classes, because that is the most efficient way to do it, we have to accept there will be a range of ability and there will be a range of cognition within that group, or there'll be a range of different abilities or non-abilities, and therefore we will have to adjust the way in which we teach to recognize that personalization is not possible. And then we've also got on the from the parent side and family side, part of the drivers for extra resourcing, part of the driver for having diagnoses is the feeling from parents that they don't have the outcomes for their child that they want. They don't necessarily have confidence in the system is going to deliver for their child, or the school is going to deliver for their child. And they also believe that their child has fallen behind and the old system is inequitous. So these, both in terms of the current position and the pressure for more funding and the pressure for more diagnosis, is if we're not going to call a halt to it and find a different approach, is going to lead to a breakdown of the system. And I think we're already at that point where people feel their children not being as well served, the local authorities are overstretched, the schools are overstretched, and we can't deliver what we're expected to deliver. So we have to find a different way. And hopefully Tom and his group will be coming out with recommendations which actually enable a rethink of the universal provision, which is what we think is the way forward. I do want to talk a little bit about our trust, because we are based around London, but we're not based in the city of London. Our schools are based in Southwark, Lambeth, Islington and Hackney, and they serve incredibly disadvantaged populations. We have significantly, almost in most of our schools, double the SEND rates. We have double the pupil premium rates. But having said that, we've been really successful. As you said, 6 out of 10 schools are being judged outstanding. 2 out of that 10 have got good, but have got outstanding elements within it. 2 are deemed good, and we've just had a new school join, which hasn't yet been inspected. But we know that what we're doing is making a difference, because when we look at our results, particularly last year when we had progress results, if you've got different range of children, you don't necessarily just look at the absolute outcomes in terms of GCSEs. You look at the progress children are making, and as a trust, we were the strongest co-educational trust for progress in the country across all of our schools with disadvantaged young people, which is a really important thing to hang on to when we're thinking about this, because we know the complexities, we know the difficulties, but we've got solutions which are at least significantly successful in terms of addressing those. And largely it's about universal provision, largely it's about high expectations for all, and largely it's about ensuring that all of our children are cared for and supported. And care, when we talk about care in our context, we're talking about the real parental care, boundaried care, real understanding that we need to provide the scaffolds for young people, all young people, including special needs, to be able to function in the outside world by the time they get to 16, 17, 18. So what do we characterize our schools with? This is sort of general mission statement. It's always about high expectations for all the children, about aspirations, excellence, a belief that all that can succeed, certainly all can make dramatic progress. We like to combine creativity and innovation with enterprise, but alongside traditional things which we know have worked over many years, and continuity. And we want to develop young people who are confident, resilient, particularly at the moment. We need our young people, particularly those with diagnoses of special needs, whatever that may be, ADHD, autism, to be able to function in the outside world in a meaningful sense, and bring a better life for themselves, create a better life for themselves and potentially for their families. So our general principles, educational principles, are built on this pyramid. We start at the bottom. The fundamental for everything we do is high expectation leadership. My belief in the ability of children to succeed is matched by Anna's in all of our heads. We need that as a baseline. If we don't have that as a baseline, we make all sorts of expedient decisions. The child's got special needs, therefore they can't do this. The child's got special needs, well, maybe they should... traditionally used to be, maybe they'll do something with their hands. Those sorts of attitudes are not welcome in our trust, and are anathema to our ethos of high expectations, belief-led leadership. Then we need exemplary behaviour, and that's a challenge. But what's interesting about that is we have a lot of discussions across the country about increasing numbers of children with autism, ADHD, special needs, not being able to cope in a structured environment, when actually they cope much better in a structured environment, where there are routines and boundaries which are predictable. They create a safe space for children to be. And rather like in a family where children can go to one parent and another parent, and if they aren't at least partly on the same page, and that's not always easy, I've got my own challenges at home sometimes, but if they're not at least sort of on the same page, then it allows the child to push the boundaries, behave badly, which is detrimental to themselves and actually makes them feel anxious. And when they feel anxious, they can't learn. So we need settled, calm, safe, predictable environments. So that requires exemplary behavior systems, all built on routines and rituals which are predictable. We need an exceptionally good curriculum tailored to those individual students, which is going to ensure that they develop. And particularly for special needs students, they may not be able to do all of the academic curriculum, but we shouldn't be taking away the core parts of the academic curriculum without very good reason, because they need their English and maths. They need to be proficient in those subject areas to be able to survive in the outside world. And we need outstanding teaching which is engaging, gets the children into classrooms, understands their issues. And this is where Anna's been really at the vanguard of what we're doing in terms of ensuring that it isn't just the general classroom that's catered for, but it's the children with special needs. And then we need to intervene and support. And with the, whatever we do, the icing on the cake will be intervening, assessing, and supporting those young people. So the highlights for us as a trust are that over the last few years, or last year, we, as I've said, most improved trust for pupil progress. We're 5th nationally best performing 6 school plus trust for disadvantaged pupils, with a top co-educational trust for disadvantaged 16 to 19-year-olds, and all the 4 inspections we had last year were outstanding. So, we haven't got every solution. Nobody has. But I think that objectively points to the fact that we are doing something right. And we want to be able to share what we're doing to help other schools and other aspects of the system, other parts of the system, to support us in the way we go forward. And we've certainly been promoting our approaches to the reference group that is going to be reporting back, and we're hopeful that there will be a movement to the direction that we're working towards. So the guiding principles. This is what really frames the individual school actions. Children are generally cognitively pretty similar. If I go back to the slide before, if we look at Willingham 2012, how we learn is more similar than it is different. So actually, we can pretty much determine what is the best method of learning in a classroom, best method of teaching, whether children are special needs or mainstream in that sense. And instead of viewing SEND support as a primarily separate, we should prioritize making core teaching practices inherently more inclusive. And that is what the SEND First approach does. And that's from McRae, Barker, Goodrich, 2025. There's lots of academic research and literature in this area. And it really points to the solution being along these principles. The point about embracing cognitive similarity, not looking for difference, looking for similarity, understanding that the way that we teach in terms of cognitive brain theory there is actually a best way of teaching, which actually is, can be enhanced by brilliant teachers, but as a core baseline should be delivered by every teacher, whatever their level of experience, whatever their particular talents are. And we can codify that, and we can actually expect that in classrooms. So that's one key thing. Teaching frameworks are adaptive, and when they're used intentionally and consistently, they make a big difference to young people. So we expect to adapt our teaching in terms of the children in front of us. We expect to adapt our questioning strategy to ensure that the children have access to those questions and can answer those questions orally. And then the modelling of that can be produced, and then they can actually take that model and use that question answering questions. But we need to do this intentionally and consistently. It shouldn't just be haphazard, managed to teach a good lesson, not quite sure how it happened, but we can actually create frameworks that actually support our newest teachers and teachers new to the profession to be able to do that well, and to incorporate inclusive teaching through the methodology of teaching, which is our standard approach. And it is also true to say that we can adapt, but we just need to adapt often, quite minimally and appropriately. Sometimes we don't need to do a lot to actually ensure that the learning lands and the children progress. We don't necessarily need a TA or teacher assistant with a child. We don't necessarily need to create lots of new resources for children. We might need to go over to the child and explain what they need to do for 30 seconds and write on their exercise book what the next step is, so that they've got a scaffold to go forward. So it doesn't have to require a huge amount of extra work for teachers. And actually, like I said right at the beginning, I think one of the problems we've got in the whole complex arena of special needs, where every child has different learning requirements, is that the solutions are often seen to be, or often assume to be equally complex. The solutions actually are hierarchical. We need to start with the basic universal solutions that work for everybody. We need to adapt minimally where necessary. Then we adapt more. Then for children who have significant need, we might need a completely different approach. But that is such a small group of children. We need to encompass much more of what we do in a classroom. And then finally, of course, greater complexity does warrant greater expertise, and how we develop that expertise is critical. So what I'm going to do now is ask Anna to say within her school, which has been successful in closing the SEND gaps in terms of attainment, and has created a much more inclusive school by adopting these strategies. But she has a particular take on that, which has been particularly successful and forms the core of what she's doing. So much so, and I'll spare Anna's blushes here, but she's been seconded by the local authority to try and spread the work that she's doing across many more schools than just the school she's working in at the moment. And of course, we're doing that within the trust, across all of our boroughs. So Anna, I don't know if you want to take it up from there. Shall I just put your slide on? Next one.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'll be there. You can be Chris Whitty. Just say next slide, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to see you all. The challenge for me when I became principal 3 years ago was to take those ideas, which I think Mark and I have always been in agreement on, and we've worked together for quite a long time. Essentially, the idea that the most important support for young people with special educational needs is in the classroom, and that this idea, which I think is talked about a lot in education, but which becomes problematic when it is implemented, is the idea that every teacher is a teacher of special educational needs children. That idea has been around for a long time, but the implementation of that is quite tricky. My school has significant numbers of students who have special educational needs. So about 5% have an educational healthcare plan, and about 20 to 25% are on the special educational needs register at support level. And I have a disproportionate boy-girl split due to a girls' school that's very close. It's an inner city school in Hackney, so we have a very high proportion of pupil premium students, about 60% of the pupil population. So we are in a fairly challenging circumstance. And when I became the head, what I felt was really important was that the success of the students in the school with special educational needs was absolutely integral to the success of the school. And I think that is really where the first part of SEND first comes from, which is, rather than regarding children with special educational needs as something which needs to be thought of afterwards, it's something that needs to be thought of first, hence SEND first. Next slide, please, Mark. So essentially, the idea of SEND first can be boiled down to the 3 bullet points that I've on the slide. Firstly, the idea that SEND students come first and not last. So traditionally, in the way that we deliver inset, or the way we think about SEND students, we might think about everything that we do for the mainstream, and then we think about the SEND students. So we have flipped that the other way around. Whenever we discuss anything, we think about the SEND students first. So when we deliver any piece of CPD, we talk about first how it meets the needs of the SEND students. When we look at a policy or a procedure, we think first, how does that meet the needs of the SEND students, so that their needs are always borne in mind. And that, I think, comes a long way to addressing the issue that of SEND students becoming forgotten and parents feeling like their needs aren't met. An example of that is the way we might intervene in a classroom. So we have a very simple way in which we think about how we meet students' needs. First of all, we think about seating plan. So when we train staff to set up a seating plan, the first step in them setting up the seating plan is looking at the students in their class who have special educational needs and placing those students in the seating plan first. And whenever we go and have a look at how that class is organised, the person looking will say, where have you placed your children with special educational needs and why have you placed them there? So it's very simple, it's not rocket science, but it means that every teacher in the school bears those children in mind first when they're teaching them. The second element of that is about the idea of expertise and accountability being shared. So there is a very strong view in education often that held particularly by main scale teachers and others, that I don't know enough to meet this child's needs. So we have worked really hard to challenge that narrative, and that everybody sees themselves as having enough expertise to deal with and meet the needs of all the children that come through their door. And we have children in the school with really complex needs. There's a massive range, but that with regular high quality training and because the systems have been designed with SEND students' needs put in mind, that absolutely everybody here has got what they need, and that the child with SEND doesn't need to have their needs met separately in a way by a special person with expertise, that we are those special people with expertise that will meet those children's needs. And then finally, the idea that SEND students are included and not excluded. And again, we talk about that a lot in education, and there'll be a lot of discussion about how SEND students are disproportionately represented in exclusions, and they are. But what we're talking about here is that SEND students' needs can be met in the same spaces and systems as other children's with simple, reasonable adjustment. So, and that culture of celebrating difference, so that all of us speak the language that, for example, being a child with autism, that might be regarded as your superpower and not your deficit. An example of that I might give in terms of the day-to-day would be one of the things that people might suggest for a SEND child is that they can't be in the playground because it's too noisy and difficult for them. So what I would say to that is that means you've got a playground problem, not that sits in your playground, and you need to make the playground a space where everybody feels like they can be comfortable. So that might mean that you have a space which is a quieter part of the playground. That might be about managing behaviour in the playground so that nobody feels unsafe there. And that's what I mean by SEND students being included, that we meet the needs of the SEND child by making the environment a place that they can be, as opposed to taking them out of that environment and putting them in a different one. We've done some research, we're just finishing some research with Brunel University, and that has demonstrated from all of the stakeholders that this is really regarded very positively. So I would also say that we are by no means there, and there's still lots of work to do, and it's an ongoing project. It's about changing perceptions, and that can be really difficult. It's like painting the fourth bridge. As soon as you start, you have to finish, you have to start again. But we do feel very positive about it, and I would cite the progress and the success that the school has had in recent years is in no small part due to this approach, I think.
I would just like to say a couple of things about that, which is really, as Anna says, in terms of the philosophical approach, we have both felt for many years that there's an overcomplexity around special needs, both in terms of the paperwork, the processes, the whole cottage industry around private practitioners providing diagnoses for children, the statementing process, the HCP plan process, the meetings which require large numbers of professionals to sit around a table. And actually, to what end? The question is, to what end? What are the children getting out of that? There is the 10.4 billion is largely spent on staffing and bureaucracy. And actually, there are many simplifications we could add to the system. We do accept, as Anna said, that there are children with complex needs. We need more expertise, absolutely. But children with needs which require good quality teaching, small adaptations in the classroom, that should be absolutely the preserve of classroom teachers. And as Anna said, they should be able to deliver that. And I've done a number of conferences recently where I've said, look, why, what you can do as a teacher without having any expertise is you can read a child's or what's coming from the Senko in terms of their sort of needs and arrangements and what their needs are. And you can actually arrange your seating within your classroom, as Anna said, and put children in seats where you can either, if they need additional support regularly, they're in the front, so you can actually help them with that work. Or if they need to be paired with somebody else because they've got issues around potentially being non-verbal, whatever the issues are, you can actually make a conscious decision, a deliberate decision about where to put them. And actually, you can then see whether that improves things. And actually, a teacher in real terms, if they're a good teacher, will be able to see in real time whether that is working or not, and then make an adjustment to where they sit. So we can go through all of the sort of the EdPsych report, and it could ask for all sorts of stipulations. But in our experience, that's been one of the most effective. The other one of the most effective things is that if we're looking at the marking of students' books, is to actually take the special need child first and spend, because inevitably human nature is that you've got all the books there in a pile, read the first one, and then by the time you're at the end, and it's the end of, I don't know, you're watching the end of Emmerdale, whatever, it's like, it's a bit more sketchy. So you take the special needs children's books first, you look at them first. They need more support, they need more help. The more able children can be pretty self-sufficient, actually, to be honest. So there is the ability for us to do that quite simply. That just requires organisation, doesn't require any specific training or skill. So what Anna's done is and also asking questions, actually. One of the things we can do without preparing any additional resources is to ask appropriate questions to elicit responses from children with special needs that may be adjusted just by us knowing them and knowing what we think they can answer and what will edge them to the right answer. So all of these things, when we call them SAM, we call it seating, plan, asking the questions, then marking. This SAM approach has not fallen often within the special needs community or with a great deal of, or not been accepted with a great deal of enthusiasm. And I part of me has to think that might be because it's sort of debunking a little bit of the mythology around special needs. Because if it's that simple and you can achieve the results Anna's achieved and the benefits for the children Anna's achieved, why isn't every school doing it? And then what happens to all of the industry, the cottage industry around the special needs provision? And does it not mean that the EHCP plans, instead of being, I don't know how big they are now, Anna, how many pages do you reckon, Anna, in the EHCP plan?
Yeah, about 10 to, it depends how many professionals have contributed, but about 10 to 15 pages long.
About 10. So instead of being one side of A4, you've got 10 pages to read. And if you've got 50 or 60 children, you've got to read them all. And if you're in a secondary school with a large number of special needs children, you are supposed to, as a main scale teacher, read 50 odd EHCP plans. It's just not doable. And it's not reasonable to expect that. So I think that what we're trying to do is say, okay, there's mainstream children, then there's a level of special needs children, and there's some children with the HCP plans. And actually those three levels can probably be managed in the classroom with more simple approaches. And then if we're looking for more complex cases, then we do need some specialist intervention at that level, and that might require some resourcing. Now, if the government could get that principle across the whole system, it would free up the resources for the children actually needed and provide more resource for those children with more complex needs, which would benefit them and allow the teachers more freedom and the schools more freedom to deliver in the classrooms for the rest of the children. That's the principle.
Thanks ever so much, Mark and Anna, for such a timely and thought-provoking presentations. I think that's a great time for us to start thinking about some questions. And I know that a number of colleagues that were not able to attend, they have sent the questions. So I'll hand over to Aidan again, who is going to be handling the questions. And great to see that Tony has one question already. Aidan, over to you.
Thanks, Olympia. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Anna. Tony, I'll turn to you first if you want to ask your question.
We cannot hear you, I think.
There's an issue with the sound for some reason, Tony.
Can you pop it in the chat?
Just while Tony's typing his question into the chat, start with one of the questions that we were asked in advance. A question to both of you, but whoever wishes to take it to answer it. Do we live in an age of overdiagnosis regarding SEND?
Anna, do you want to answer that?
I mean, I think that's something which certainly the statistics would suggest that many, many more children are being diagnosed with special educational needs than in previous years. So something is happening. Either there is our children have far more needs than they used to have, or those needs are being named more often. I mean, one of those two things must be happening. I think we use that. I think one of the things that is really important around this debate is how we talk about it. I mean, we have already seen in the press the kind of really very quickly this debate becomes very, very hysterical because lots of people have got lots of things invested in it, not least their children, who they worry about a lot. So I think that yes, I think far more children are being diagnosed, and I do not think that always those diagnoses are helpful. Because the bottom line is that the diagnosis should be the start of the journey, and so there is no doubt that sometimes diagnosing the challenge a child faces is helpful because it enables them to conceive of themselves in the context that they're functioning in, and that is helpful. If you have a dyslexic child, for example, it can be really helpful for them to understand the challenge that they're facing, and that doesn't mean that they're just stupid. However, as I said, the diagnosis has always got to be seen as the beginning of the journey, as in the diagnosis then should help you to understand what needs to be done. And I think there needs to be a more nuanced view on whether diagnosis is a helpful thing or not, whether labelling is a helpful thing or not, and whether or not a child is diagnosed with a special educational need. The point is that then simply should signpost us to what do we need to do to support the child to be successful. I think there's a sort of sense that a diagnosis makes it acceptable, it makes it real, it makes it concrete, it means that you can argue for your rights a bit more, that kind of thing. So there are definitely challenges around it, and in tie to that, I think, is the issue that and this we're dealing with this very much across Hackney, the idea that in order to have any kind of need met, you must have an EHCP. Now that manifestly isn't true, and in fact, that has changed significantly in the last 10 years. So there were definitely 10 years ago students in school with really quite complicated needs whose needs were met via SEND support, and nowadays that would be much more unlikely. And that is again because there is a view that you will not get what you need and what you want for your child unless you have that EHCP. And to get the EHCP, the diagnosis is what will help that to happen. So yes, that's a very long answer. Yes, but I think there are lots of sort of subtleties around that idea of overdiagnosis.
Can I just say, from a system level, I would say that there must be overdiagnosis, and some of the diagnosis is being sought actively because we have essentially an adversarial system where the parents will challenge the local authority or the school to get a diagnosis because they require some action or support for their child, and they believe it can only be, and maybe they'd be convinced by others, that can only be delivered by some adjustment or some resource. And that is right. The people are chasing AHCP plans because they feel that, and challenging in tribunals a lot of the time, and causing a huge amount of cost in tribunals, because they believe that that's the only way to get what their child needs. By getting a resource and, a laptop, or however that's manifest, whatever they think. And I think it's very difficult for local authorities, the government, to hold a line and say, we think your child is being well served, when the parent thinks they aren't being well served at the moment. And that means that there's a lot of points of conflict around. And I will point to the, one clear example that we talked about before with children with special needs, cognitive issues, are allowed extra time in examinations. And in independent schools, what we're seeing, and I think this has been reported nationally, 40% of children who sat exams in independent schools received extra time. The numbers of children, the percentage of children in state schools was probably more like 20%, 30%. So that doesn't really tally with the educational outcomes that we see. And I struggle to think that 40% of, if we're looking at 40% of children having some sort of special cognitive need, then we are edging it. We're in the normal distribution. We're in the range of the normal distribution curve. And so we're essentially diagnosing or part diagnosing or giving children extra time who really shouldn't be having it. And I think there's a big pushback from the exam boards on this now, but because of this. So I think there is, I would say, when you look at the global figures, you'd say yes, but as Anna's absolutely right, it may well be high in a particular school or with a particular group of children and families, but it's absolutely appropriate and it's needed in order for the child to understand where they are. So if a child understands they've got dyslexia, whether they've got a support plan with that, whether they've got a resource coming with that, them understanding the difficulties they have and finding ways to overcome them is actually a useful thing, because they're not thinking, oh, well, I'm just not very bright, when actually they can be very cognitively able, but just not able in that particular aspect of work, in terms of being able to codify and write well and spell well. That's an area where they're not as strong, but they might have great other strengths. And as Anna said, there could be, with autistic children, they could have fantastic abilities in other areas. So I would say my short answer would be yes, but with caveats.
Thanks, Mark. That's triggered another question that I'd like to ask. It also relates to another question we've been sent in advance, but just to go back to Tony's question, he's put that in the chat, which is, Tony would be interested in any comments that you and Anna have on how you encourage children's engagement and agency linked to breadth and balance of the curriculum.
Anna can talk from her school's point of view. We do want to make sure that children have got the best possible chances of getting, core subjects, and so we put extra time for children who are struggling in those areas. And that might well be special needs children in Maths and English, but we also limit that and ensure that children have got access to good sports, good art provision, good performing arts provision, music. In Anna's school, for example, every child gets the opportunity to study a musical instrument, whether they've done that or not at primary school, and then really good ones get sponsored to have scholarships as they go forward. And they've got a link with the Guildhall School of Music. I know that can't be afforded to every school in the country, but when they get to sixth form, they can study A-levels alongside going to the being a comprehensive school, I think, means ensuring that the children have opportunities to pursue their interests and to excel in those interests. Whether they are generally okay at everything, they should experience that. But if they've got a particular talent, we need to find it, we need to expose it, we need to allow them to develop, at least in the school, to a point where they can do that externally through clubs or societies or other interests they have. And Anna, you can maybe talk a little bit about your curriculum and what you've protected in your curriculum, whilst obviously providing more support for children at the bottom end.
Yeah, so yeah, in terms of breadth and balance, we, as Mark says, we are really committed to ensuring that there is a full range of opportunities for all students. And so at Key Stage 3, our curriculum remains really broad. There is for students who require, there is additional intervention in English and maths, but that doesn't narrow their curriculum. And I feel very strongly that that's very important for all young people to have full access to a breadth of curricular opportunities. And that also is where you then can make sure that you are always not buying into the deficit model for SEND students. So too much of what we discuss around SEND is about what children can't do and not what they can do. And so by ensuring they have a broad curriculum, that ensures that we find all the things they can do. So a really good example is we have a young person in year 9 who is probably the child in the school with the most complex needs. He's largely non-verbal. He can speak, but it's very, very difficult for him. But he has a beautiful singing voice, so he can sing beautifully, and we can then champion that talent. And that child then is perceived by himself and by others not just a special child but that he is a child with talents and abilities. And that's a really important part of that culture of celebrating difference. And that needs to be, we need to be assertive about that with young people, because otherwise they will slip into prejudices really quite easily. One of the things that we have done to amend the curriculum to support young people with SEND is on the transition point, which are the transition points are some of the most difficult for children with SEND. So the transition from primary to secondary. So in our year 7, we have a transition group, and it is deliberately called a transition group and not a nurture group, because it is not a separate group that these children are going to stay in forever. It is a group which is designed to minimize, when they first come into secondary school, the cognitive overload of having lots and lots of different teachers. So they're taught 5 subjects: RE, PHSE, geography, history, and computing. Although actually we don't teach computing necessarily separately anymore. But they are taught that by one teacher, and she is our SEND lead practitioner. And the aim of that group is to support these young people to be able to access the full mainstream at secondary school. So it is a time-limited intervention which supports them through that very, very challenging period. Often those are children with EHCPs, although not always. And we identify them with the primary school, and we've run it for 2 years, so that by the end of that process, all of those children have all their lessons in the mainstream classes. We found that to be very, very successful, because prior to that we often had lots of challenges for those students at that transition point. And then to speak to your point about student engagement, so we have a SEND student voice group that meet to specifically discuss issues that they see with how we support them in school. So again, that's sort of part of the idea of SEND being first and not last, that those are voices that need a particular context in which to be able to articulate their view, and they have that space. And we also have, some of those also go and speak to people at the local authority to articulate what they think supports them and what doesn't. I think we have to be really kind of quite brave and unashamed about saying some people have special educational needs, and that's fine, and we're all going to talk about that, and it's nothing to be ashamed of, because otherwise that's where, as I said, young people will very easily slide into sort of prejudice that is really unhelpful.
Thank you both. Question from Emma in the chat, which I'm going to ask and then maybe push a little bit further. So could you talk a little bit about how you work with and collaborate with parents of SEND students in your schools, and do you have any examples of good practice? Maybe to take that another stage further, particularly with parents that you referenced might be quite keen to get EHCPs or particular diagnoses for their children, which might contravene what your professional opinion might be.
Anna's had direct experience of this over many years. I've been a Senko before, so you know, it is quite challenging. I think it's very important to get the trust of parents. We do various things strategically across schools. Most of the schools run sort of drop-in sessions, surgeries, things like that. But and some specifically for special needs parents to meet, because sometimes they've got issues to share or solutions they can help each other with. But Anna, I don't know if you could talk to those particular examples and challenges.
Yeah, so I would say parents are, of all of the stakeholders involved in the Send First process, parents are the most challenging to get on board, because, and that's what, again, go back to thinking about how important language is. So that's because it can be, if you get that wrong, the language around it wrong, it's so easy for that agenda to be hijacked. And I think, you know, as an aside, the change that the government are trying to drive through at the moment it just needs some people to start to talk about reducing the number of EHCPs, and that feels to parents like their support for their children is going to be taken away. And whilst it might be true that the outcome of improved SEND provision will be that there will be fewer EHCPs, if we set that out as an objective, the whole debate just becomes about that instead of about actually meeting the needs of children in schools. So it's definitely the hardest gig. However, as Mark said, building trust is really important. So again, on the transition points, that's really important. So examples of things that we do are we bring the parents of children with special needs in who are coming into Year 7 earlier and more often than the other parents. So we give them lots of space to share their anxiety so we can address it. We bring the children in more to school so that they've got more information and ways in which they can manage the school. We have regular SEND coffee mornings, SEND parent coffee mornings, sorry, and we really specifically target and encourage parents to come in, not just because they've got a problem, but because we're going to support them with some aspect of their child's education. So we theme those. So we might say, for example, we've got a SEND coffee morning and we're going to talk to you, we're going to help you understand how you might support your child with maths homework, which we do on an online platform called Sparks, so that becomes about concrete ways in which we can support, rather than, because often parent events without careful navigating can become about where people just express their anxiety all the time in sometimes not very helpful ways. But really, it goes back to when Olympia introduced me. She talked about what we feel is success in a school, and I'll put that on my website. That's my welcome address on my website, and that is about strong relationships. So that has to be about every teacher. So if you're a parent and your child has special education needs, and a teacher picks up the phone and says, your child did this in my class and that's a problem, and the parent has no sense that that teacher understands that their child has special educational needs, that is like a red rag to a bull. Whereas if you can ensure that and I can't say we do this 100% of the time, but if you can ensure that when the teacher picks up the phone, they say, I know about so-and-so, and I know that they need this in the classroom. However, this is what happened. And then that becomes a much more different conversation, because the parent has the confidence that the teachers really do know the child, and they really do understand the special needs. So that's where the point about SEND expertise and accountability being shared is really, really important. And that is a constant task. So we constantly use the language SEND first all the time. So to make sure that staff see that as I said, as at the core of their role, and not something that they do extra, but something that sits at the heart of it. we haven't won all of our parents over. I think it's important to be honest about that. We in this research we just did, we got really, really positive feedback from lots and lots of parents. Well, from a significant number of parents. Not all of the parents completed the survey, but it is definitely true that there are some parents for whom it is still really philosophically difficult, this idea.
Thanks, Anna. Question from Olympia on the, both of you mentioned quite a number of times the importance on well-trained staff, but also confident staff in terms of meeting SEND pupil needs in the classrooms of City of London Academy Trust schools. Could you say anything about how you go about meeting teacher training needs, how you go about kind of professionally developing teachers to be confident with SEND pupils, and then as an extension of that, any thoughts and recommendations you have for implications for teacher training in the UK?
Can I just start with the playbook, Anna? So we across the trust we work, and we've got a playbook which actually identifies the high leverage points of teaching, the high leverage points of leadership, high leverage points for supporting young people and intervening. And it really, if we're going to be successful training everybody, we've got to get, first of all, and it's, you know, I'll go back to this point about being hierarchical, we've got to get the baseline in all classrooms with all members of staff, and therefore it needs to be at the baseline. The baseline needs to be very simple. It needs to be simply activated by everybody. So does everybody sit children deliberately in a seating plan? Does everybody go around and mark the children, the SEND children's work first? Does everybody ask questions which are differentiated so that they are able to be scaffolded for the young people? So those things largely most I would say average teachers, new teachers can get to grips with. And then you build that expertise over time, and you build in specialists in certain areas, because some of the things they have to manage, particularly with dealing with more complex children and complex needs, is not trainable within the first 6 months of a job or the first 2 years of a job. It comes from a huge amount of experience, often in terms of looking at best practice, but not always, because the situations you get put in as a teacher with you know, children who've got special needs, particularly if that manifests itself in behavioural challenges, is often very difficult, and is often very public, and is often unforeseen, because if it was foreseen, you would have made sure it didn't happen. So there are sort of techniques we use in those areas. There are things we can train, but ultimately, when we've got complex issues, a complex situation, we have to draw upon our more experienced teachers. But that builds over time. But we, all of us, the most experienced to the least experienced, need to be ensure that we are delivering on the baseline, because that consistency provides a culture within the school, which means that when you're dealing with issues, you're dealing with children who are not learning, we're dealing with children who you can't seem to move on, they become much fewer and then more manageable, and you can spend more time on it. If we're all running around trying to do our own thing, we end up with a patchwork, and so many more children fall through the gaps. So the only thing I would say from my perspective is that it needs to be simple. It's in our playbook. That provides the bare bones. And then Anna, in her school, will interpret that for her staff and deliver for her staff and deliver the expertise she needs in her context. So Anna, over to you, I think.
Yeah, I would echo the point that Mark has made about it needing to be really simple. And I suppose it speaks to the part about SEND students coming first and not last. So that designing training, I think the traditional model of training has been that you deliver your teacher training to your staff, either your inset day or whatever, and then you have your module on SEND students. So we don't do that anymore. We do deliver our training. So we might deliver our training, let's say, on questioning, and we might be looking at using the technique of cold calling. But within that, we would talk about how this meets the needs of SEND students, that actually this technique is really important for SEND students because it's about their attention, it's about their focus, it's about making them feel included, it's about making sure you don't deliberately not ask that child a question ever because you think they won't be able to answer it and therefore inadvertently contribute to their underachievement. And then we also talk about how you might manage a child with a special educational need if they were to find that technique challenging. So again, the idea of cold calling is that everybody has to answer a question if they're called upon to do so. So, you know, no one can really opt out. You might get the idea, well, my child's too anxious, or that child's too anxious, you can't put them on the spot like that. Right, what we wouldn't say is, well, you can't use that technique with that child then. We would say, okay, so how do we amend that strategy so that that child can feel confident that they will be able to answer a question in class like everybody else does? And there's scaffolding you can put in place before that. But I think the philosophy is that you don't start by thinking, I'm going to train my staff on how to teach STEM students. You think, I'm going to train my staff on how to teach, and within every single training that I have, I'm going to address how that meets the needs of SEND students or how that might be adapted to meet the needs of SEND students. So it becomes at the sort of heart of what you do instead of the sort of extra bolt-on thing. And I think increasingly actually that is how it's, you know, when we think about adaptive teaching, for example, I think that really is at the heart of that philosophy. So it's a kind of, I think Mark earlier used that word intentional. It's about being intentional all the time about the things that we do and how they meet the needs of the SEND students.
Yeah, it really, just to echo that, it should be our training is on how to teach and just how to teach. And by implication, they're using this model and this approach and saying what we said before about the way children learn being more or less the same, and the level of difference being actually less than people think, that actually we can intentionally and deliberately design an approach to teaching and train teachers on it, which actually encompasses the majority of what Anna's saying in terms of the SEND first approach. It's what we do. And that should be the principle, because what we're asking people to do is very simple and doable. And as a teacher myself, you know, I was always struck by how many things I was expected to do for special needs children, EAL children, that child, the behavioural child, and actually bringing it all together and saying, you know, this is an integrated approach, which actually is deliverable. It's got these simple principles. If you do this, you will be delivering really well to 90% of the children. Then you will have time. Then you will have time to do the extra bits and pieces for the children who are not going to be engaged through that mechanism. So, yeah, I think the fragmentation of what essentially for secondary school teachers particularly is, you know, 50-minute lesson, and asking to put too much into that and making it more complex and more complex and more complex means that actually you get less consistency, and the lack of consistency, again, just going back to that point, means that the children are less safe, less secure, not sure what's happening, and therefore not learning, and particularly so the special needs children.
Thank you both. One final question from me, and then I'll hand back to Olympia for a final overall question. But taking you back to an anecdote, Mark, that you gave in response to the overdiagnosis question, and that difference between state and independent time for exams, we were actually given a question in advance that kind of plays into that a little bit, but just wondered on your thoughts that is there a bias in SEND management towards independent schools, or vice versa towards state schools? If so, how can that be compensated for?
Let me put it this way. I think, like everything, every structure in society, and you know, it is absolutely true that the people with wherewithal, the people who have got, you know, who understand the system, will work the system in the interest of their children. And that's obviously going to favour people for aspirational, often middle class and above families. If you look at coursework, one of the reasons the government got rid of coursework is it benefited children from more advantaged backgrounds. But then we switched to examinations, and then obviously there's a big surge in tutoring. So I think there is, inevitably, and it sounds a bit Marxian. You like this, Warwick University, but it does. Wherever a system is set up, it tends to favour the more advantaged, because they have the resource and wherewithal to have the sharp elbows, to push hard, to put together cogent cases, to employ a private ed psych to back their call for an EHCP plan in the interest of their children. And that's one of the problems with the system. So the more we can get an understanding that the core provision is where 90% of children's needs are met, the better for everybody.
Thank you. Olympia, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Aidan. I have to admit I cannot contain myself to take advantage of the time that we are having this conversation and ask you for a final comment and maybe something about your wish list in terms of the much anticipated SEND review response. So if there was one thing that you would like to see changed in order for everything that we talked about in terms of the challenges that we are facing to move things in the right direction for meeting the needs of all children and children with SEND, what this will be. And I would really appreciate a comment from both Anna and Mark on this. Thank you.
You go first, Anna.
What do I hope from it? I hope that I suppose that it's really at the heart of what we've talked about this afternoon is that that out of it that there just has to be a much more collaborative way of doing this. I think it's very difficult to navigate, but that fundamentally the understanding that this idea that for the majority, I mean the vast majority, including students with really quite complex needs, their needs can be met in mainstream schools, and that the best mainstream schools currently meet the needs of SEND students really well, and so that as I've really talked about all afternoon, that special educational needs becomes at the centre of what we do and not on the periphery. I think that really, if that philosophy is running through the sort of changes, then that and that's the language that I'm hearing. I wonder how much of it will get through, but I think that really is what will change things, because the reality is that a child with whatever additional need they have, be that very small or very challenging, the place that they need to function largely is in school. So we have to cite the solutions for that in school, because that's where they have to be, and they have to be in classrooms. So we have to cite the solutions in classrooms. And I think if that philosophy runs through it, then that will potentially then change the provision.
From my perspective, similar. I would like to see 90% of children in school without any reference to special needs, and us delivering appropriate support for all children, and finding mechanisms to do that. I would like to see resources diverted to the more complex needs of children, and potentially that means more specialist provision for them as well, because special school places are at a premium, and they're often those children getting squeezed out. So I would like a better redistribution of resources, and I would also like a less bureaucratic and adversarial system. So that's not one thing, I'm afraid, and that's a range. But as I said, all the noises are in that direction, but there are huge vested interests, and politically it may not be palatable for the government to go too far down that route. But I think we, as practitioners on the ground, seeing what works, we know that the system at the moment is at breaking point. Unless something along the lines of what Anna and I are suggesting happens, then I'm concerned that we'll just trundle on the same way.
Thank you both very much. I just want to say that we couldn't have asked for a much more thought-provoking and engaging conversation at such a time. We are so proud that to see all the amazing work that Warwick Alumni is doing. And let me extend the thanks this afternoon to all of you that attended the webinar. As Aidan mentioned, this is recorded, so we will have the opportunity to share it with many more colleagues and others, including our alumni, that we are sure they will benefit very much from hearing this. And also to extend the thanks to Kelly Bates and Andy McKee from the development and alumni management teams that they are with us today. And of course to Aidan for organizing the whole thing, and to the Connect team. Thank you all very much, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the next webinar. As Aidan said, we have some exciting plans in place. Aidan, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Olympia. Yes, as mentioned at the beginning, Connecting the Social Sciences webinar series is looking to run throughout this academic year, bringing experts from outside of universities, outside of the higher education sector, to come and speak to higher education audiences, tell us things that we don't know, help us in terms of our partnership development and external engagement, and really show why universities should be listening to practitioners and expert leaders as much as we would hope that leaders and practitioners would also listen to academics. As and when we have the forthcoming dates, we hope to announce those in the coming couple of weeks. Once we have those, they'll be posted online on the Social Sciences Connect external pages, also on our Faculty of Social Sciences LinkedIn pages and other platforms. But we hope you have found today interesting. Thanks again from me to Mark and to Anna, and yeah, looking forward to engaging with you again through this series.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Sorry,